We're going to die here. That's what the Navy SEALs said, hardened operators who had survived war zones, ambushes, and combat that would break most men. They were trapped inside a remote Alaskan military hospital, a blizzard sealing every exit, the radio dead, and rescue impossible. Then the helicopter pilot stopped breathing, and with him went their only way out. Every trained soldier in that room accepted it. Every single one, except the young nurse standing in the corner, the one nobody had bothered to learn the name of. She stepped forward, looked them all in the eye, and said, "I can fly the Jayhawk." The room laughed. Then she said a name, a unit designation, something that hadn't been spoken aloud in over a decade, and every SEAL in that room went absolutely silent. If this story already has you hooked, follow along until the very end, hit like, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The snow started coming down hard around 300, which was when Nurse Ava Carter first understood that something about this deployment had gone wrong before she even landed. She'd been airlifted to St. Eldridge Military Hospital 11 days ago, a forward support facility carved into the southern edge of the Alaska Range, roughly 40 miles from anything that could be called civilization. The hospital served a rotating population of military personnel stationed at the nearby Dunmore Training Corridor, a joint service installation that ran cold weather survival and special operations exercises year-round. It wasn't glamorous work. The cases were mostly frostbite, altitude sickness, training injuries, and the occasional psychological evaluation that no one talked about openly. Ava had expected that. She'd prepared for that. She hadn't prepared for a SEAL team to come in on a medevac at 02:45 with 2 critically wounded operators, and a third who was walking but shouldn't have been. She hadn't prepared for the blizzard that rolled in 40 minutes behind them and turned the world outside into a white wall. And she definitely hadn't prepared for Chief Petty Officer Damon Reyes to look her up and down the moment she walked into the trauma bay, clock her rank insignia, and say loud enough for the whole room to hear, "Who sent us a student?" Ava didn't answer. She snapped on gloves, moved to the closest gurney, and started her assessment. The patient, Petty Officer Second Class Marcus Webb, had a penetrating wound to the left shoulder and significant blood loss. His pressure was dropping. She called it out, called for a line, and started moving. Behind her, Reyes said something to one of his men. She caught the word rookie and kept working. She was 26 years old. She knew what she looked like. She had a small frame, dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun, and the kind of quiet face that people tended to read as uncertainty. She'd spent the last 3 years learning to use that particular misreading to her advantage, and she wasn't going to waste energy correcting it at 0300 in a trauma bay with a man bleeding out in front of her. Dr. Leonard Harmon arrived 4 minutes later. He was the senior physician on site, late 50s, heavy around the jaw, with the bearing of a man who had been the most important person in the room for so long he'd stopped noticing when he wasn't. He assessed the situation in about 6 seconds, made 2 corrections to what Ava was doing that were technically accurate but practically unnecessary, and then turned to Reyes with the particular warmth he reserved for personnel of certain ranks. "Chief, hell of a night to come in." "Hell of a night, period," Reyes said. "Your girl here going to be able to handle this?" Harmon glanced at Ava. "She's competent. The senior nurses are en route from the East Wing." "Your girl." Ava pressed the gauze firmer, kept her breathing even. Webb was watching her from the gurney. He had green eyes, and he looked scared, which made sense given that he was losing blood and surrounded by strangers. She held his gaze for a second. "You're not going anywhere," she said. He blinked. Then, slowly, some of the tension went out of his shoulders. She had stabilized him by the time the senior nurses arrived. But by 0500, all 3 SEAL casualties were in beds, 2 of the 4 operating rooms were running, and the blizzard had graduated from severe to something the base meteorologist, a nervous lieutenant named Price, described as outside our modeling parameters, which meant they didn't have a good name for it yet. It was moving faster than it should have, piling snow at a rate that had already buried the main generator's exterior exhaust vents, and was working on the secondary access road. Ava took a break in the staff break room around 0530. She poured bad coffee, stood at the window, and watched the darkness outside do nothing but get wider. "You the nurse who worked on Webb?" She turned. One of the other SEALs was in the doorway. Younger than Reyes, broader in the shoulders, with a jaw that looked like it had been hit enough times to reset crooked. His left forearm was wrapped in a field dressing that someone had done poorly. "Yeah," she said. "He's asking for you." "I'll be there in a minute." He didn't move. "I'm Petty Officer Garrett Holm. Marcus is he's my teammate." "I know, I read his intake." A pause. "Is he going to be okay?" She looked at him directly. He was trying to keep his face neutral, but his jaw was tight, and his eyes were doing something complicated. She recognized that expression. It was the face of someone who was used to being responsible for the people around him and currently couldn't do anything except stand in a hallway and ask a stranger for information. "His pressure stabilized," she said. "The wound didn't hit anything critical. He lost a significant amount of blood, but he's young and his baseline readings are good. Barring complications, yes, he's going to be okay." Holm exhaled through his nose. A small thing, but she caught it. "Thank you," he said. "Let someone look at your arm," she said. He glanced down at the dressing like he'd forgotten it was there. "It's fine. It's wrapped wrong and it's going to stiffen on you. Let someone look at it." He opened his mouth, closed it, nodded once, and left. The helicopter pilot's name was Lieutenant Commander Frank Osei, and he died at 0617. It wasn't dramatic. He'd come in with the SEAL team, listed as minimally injured. A hard landing, possible concussion, neck strain. He'd been alert and talking when they processed him, but he'd had a slow epidural hematoma that the initial scan hadn't caught, and by the time Harmon's team identified the bleed and got him into surgery, too much time had passed. Harmon came out of OR2 at 0619 and stood in the hallway with his hands at his sides and said nothing for a full 30 seconds. Ava was at the nursing station when she heard. She filed it the way she filed most things in clinical environments, efficiently, in a separate compartment, somewhere she could look at it later when her hands weren't needed. But she felt it. She felt it in the back of her chest, in the particular hollow way that deaths always hit her, even the ones she hadn't caused and couldn't have prevented. She went back to work. The thing about Osei's death that changed everything wasn't the grief, though that was real enough. It was the helicopter. The Jayhawk, a modified UH-72 that had been the team's extraction vehicle, was now sitting on the landing pad outside the hospital with a dead pilot and a blizzard building around it. Rescue from Dunmore Base was already delayed. The storm had knocked out the primary communication relay. They were on backup radio, which was functioning intermittently at best. At 0730, Reyes gathered his team in the patient ward and Ava wasn't supposed to be listening, but the wall between the supply room and the ward was thin, and she was restocking, and she heard everything. "Storm's not breaking before 1400 at minimum," Reyes said. "Maybe later. Price is saying the secondary road is going to be impassable within the hour. Rescue bird from Dunmore can't fly in these conditions." "What about the Jayhawk?" That was Holm. "No pilot. None of us are qualified on a Jayhawk. Petty Officer Doss has rotary hours, but not on that platform and not in these conditions." A pause. "We hold. We dig in. We wait for the storm to break." A different voice, lower, older. "And if it doesn't break when Price says? If the generator goes?" Silence. "Then we adapt," Reyes said. But there was something in his voice that Ava recognized. He was saying the right thing, not the true thing. He was holding the room together by sheer force of the words. She'd heard that kind of voice before. She'd been trained to produce it herself. She finished restocking, went to the break room, and stood at the window again. The snow was coming down sideways now. The landing pad was barely visible. The Jayhawk was a gray shape in all that white, lashed down with tie-offs that were disappearing under accumulation. She stood there for a long time. Then she went to find Harmon. Well, he was in his office, which was not quite a real office. Just a converted storage room with a desk and a space heater that worked intermittently. He was on the backup radio, and she stood in the doorway until he finished. "What is it?" he asked, without looking up from the equipment. "I need to ask you something." "I'm busy, Carter." "I know. I'll be quick." She stepped inside. "The Jayhawk on the pad. Has anyone done a full mechanical check on it since it landed?" He looked up now. "That's not a nursing concern. It's a concern for everyone in this building. The fuel state, the rotor condition, the avionics. Carter. He said her name the way people said words they wanted to end conversations. We have a situation under control. The team is managing extraction logistics. That is not your department. My department is patient outcomes. Right now, every patient in this building has an outcome that depends on whether we can move them before the generator fails. The generator is not going to fail. The backup generator failed twice in November. I read the maintenance logs when I arrived. It's running at reduced capacity because of the exhaust blockage issue. In these conditions, thank you, Nurse Carter. I'll keep that in mind. He turned back to the radio. Close the door on your way out. She stood there 1 second longer than was comfortable. Then she left and closed the door carefully behind her, which was somehow worse than slamming it. The generator gave a warning surge at 900. The lights flickered throughout the facility, held, flickered again, and then stabilized. 3 nurses looked at the ceiling. 2 of them didn't say anything. The third one, a compact woman named Ortega, who'd been at St. Eldridge for 2 years, said very quietly, "That's the 3rd time this week." Ava was checking Webb's dressings when the lights flickered. He was awake and tracking well, which was the good news. The bad news was that he knew enough about field conditions to understand what a power fluctuation in a blizzard-locked hospital meant. "How bad is it?" he asked. "Don't know yet." "That's not an answer." "I know." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the wind had graduated to a sound she didn't have a good word for. Not a howl, not a roar, something more continuous than either of those, like the pressure itself was constant and the world was just vibrating inside it. "Osie's gone," Webb said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." He looked at the ceiling. He was a good pilot. "Yeah. We're stuck. For now." He turned his head to look at her. "What's your read?" "Honest." She considered that. She looked at the IV line, at the monitor readings, at the window where snow was pressing itself against the glass in sheets. "My honest read is that the situation is serious, and that serious situations change. What's your pain level?" 4. "You're lying." 6. "Better. I'll adjust the dosage." She was reaching for the IV setup when the door to the ward opened and Reyes came in. He moved to Webb's bedside without looking at her and started talking to his man in the low, clipped way of someone delivering a briefing. Ava finished her adjustment and started to step away. "Hold on," Reyes said, not to her, to Webb. Then to her. "You got something to say?" She paused. "Excuse me?" "Harmon said you came to him about the helicopter, about checking the mechanical." His eyes on her were flat and assessing. "You know something about Jayhawk systems?" She met his gaze. "I know enough to ask the right questions." That's a dodge. "It's an accurate statement." He studied her for a moment. Reyes was maybe 42, 43, with close-cut silver at his temples, and the particular stillness of a man who'd learned a long time ago that most problems could wait 30 more seconds to see if they solved themselves. He wasn't stupid. She'd clocked that immediately. "You fly?" he asked. "I've had training." "What kind of training?" "The relevant kind." He made a sound that might have been a laugh if it had been warmer. "You're a character, Carter." "You have wounded men and a grounded helicopter and a storm that's getting worse," she said. "I can help. I'm telling you I can help. Whether you want to hear that is your decision." She left before he could respond. The tracer event that broke the morning open came at 10:43. Lieutenant Price, the meteorologist, found Ava in the supply corridor at a half-run. He was a slight man, and he moved like someone who was used to being the person who delivered bad news and had never gotten comfortable with it. "The generator's reading critical on the secondary fuel line, was it?" he said. "Maintenance just found it. There's a crack in the line. Probably stress fracture from the cold. They can patch it, but it's going to take time, and during the repair window, we're going to be on battery backup only, which means we've got maybe 90 minutes of capacity for the ICU equipment." Ava processed this in approximately 4 seconds. "Who knows?" "Harmon. And now you." "Have you told Reyes?" "I was going to tell Harmon first." "Tell Reyes. Right now, before you tell anyone else." She was already moving. "Why?" Because Harmon's going to spend 20 minutes deciding how to present it, and we don't have 20 minutes. She stopped, turned back. Tell him 90 minutes on battery. Tell him the Jayhawk is our only out. Tell him exactly that, nothing softer. Price stared at her. You're a nurse. Yes, she said. Go. He went. She walked to the window at the end of the corridor and looked out at the pad. The Jayhawk was still there, still lashed down, still disappearing under snow. The tie-offs would need to be cleared. The pre-flight checks would take 12 minutes in good conditions, longer in this. The rotor blades would need de-icing. The avionics on that specific platform ran a cold soak initialization sequence that took 8 minutes from power-up. She was running numbers she hadn't run in 3 years, and they were still coming up clean. Footsteps behind her. She turned. Reyes and 3 of his men, moving fast. Harmon 2 steps behind, looking like a man who'd just been informed that someone had rearranged his furniture without asking. Price says you directed him to me, Reyes said. Seemed efficient? Harmon's the senior medical officer on site. Harmon's decisions affect patients. Yours affect the mission. Price's information was tactical. Reyes looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression. Not softening exactly, more like recalibration. Tell me about your flight training. I'd rather show you. The bird's grounded. Osei's... I know about Osei. She kept her voice level. I can fly the Jayhawk. The silence that followed had a specific quality. The quality of a room in which several people are recalculating a person they had already categorized. She'd been in silences like this before. She knew how to wait through them. You're a nurse, one of the other SEALs said. Not cruel, genuinely confused. Correct. Jayhawk's a modified Lakota. She flies different from the standard platform, especially in instrument conditions. I know. The center of gravity shifts under lateral load, the anti-torque response is faster than it looks on paper, and the FLIR system on this variant has a 2-second thermal lag that you have to compensate for in low visibility. The SEAL who'd spoken, a tall man with sergeant's insignia she hadn't registered yet, stared at her. Reyes said, Where did you learn that? And here it was, the moment she'd been carrying around like a stone in her chest for 3 years. Palmetto Flight Group, she said, attached to SEAL Team 9 flight program, Alpha Rotation. She watched it move across his face, disbelief first, then something that wasn't quite recognition, more like the moment before recognition, when a fact is trying to become real. That program doesn't exist, Reyes said carefully. It was decommissioned. It was classified, she said. That's different. Who trained you? She looked at him directly. Commander James Harlan Carter, she said. Call sign Ghostline, SEAL Team 9, commanding officer, Alpha Rotation. He was also my father. The name landed in the room like something physical. She watched Reyes's expression change. Not slowly, not gradually, but in a single instant like a card flipping. The others reacted differently. One of them went very still. Another took a half step back. Reyes's jaw was tight. His eyes were doing something she couldn't fully read. He opened his mouth, then the exterior alarm went off. Not the generator alarm, the perimeter alarm. And Reyes's radio crackled to life with a voice that didn't belong to anyone on the base. St. Eldridge, we have personnel at your south fence. Repeat, armed personnel at your south fence. This is not a drill. Everyone in the hallway moved at once. Ava moved with them toward the tactical window at the corridor's end, the one that faced south. Through the white wall of snow, barely visible but unmistakably there, were shapes. 4 of them. Maybe 5. Moving toward the building with the deliberate, low-profile movement of people who had done this before. Reyes pulled his radio. Holm, DOS, south fence, armed contact now. He turned back to Ava. His expression had changed again, past the history of her name, past the shock of the last 60 seconds, into something operational and immediate. How long to pre-flight that bird? He said. 14 minutes, she said. Less if I have help. He stared at her for exactly 2 seconds. Stay close, he said. And the hospital stopped being a hospital. Reyes moved fast and she moved with him, which was the only reason she was in the tactical corridor at all when the second alarm hit. The interior one, the short urgent pulse that meant breach rather than approach. Contact inside the perimeter rather than outside it. He stopped, looked at her, looked at the radio. That's not possible, one of his men said. South fence is still... They came in two directions, Ava said. South was the distraction. Reyes keyed his radio. Holm, report. Static. Then Holmes' voice, compressed and tight. East service entrance. 2 tangos, maybe 3. We've got Dr. Harmon's assistant. She opened the door. Everyone went still for half a second. Price, Ava said. Reyes looked at her. Price was running from the generator room when he found me, she said. He was already coming toward me when he delivered the fuel line report. He knew exactly where I'd be. She kept her voice flat, factual, the way she'd been trained to deliver information in a situation where panic was contagious. I don't know if that means anything. It means something, Reyes said. He made 2 quick hand gestures to the men behind him. Ava didn't know their names yet, the tall sergeant and a shorter one with tape wrapped around his knuckles, and they peeled off toward the east corridor without a word. Then it was just Reyes and her. Harmon's assistant, Reyes said. You know her? Lena Vogel. She's been here 6 weeks, arrived 2 weeks before I did. You think she's part of this? I think she opened a door during a blizzard to let armed men inside a hospital. That's not accidental. He didn't argue the point. Okay, we need the patients moved. Ward 3 is interior, no exterior walls. I know the layout. I'll move them. She was already thinking through it. Webb was mobile enough if he was careful, the other 2 SEAL casualties less so. The civilian patients, 2 frostbite cases and a training injury, could walk. The problem was the OR. What's the status on your men in surgery? Petty Officer Doss went in 40 minutes ago. Should be another hour at minimum. Then someone needs to hold that corridor. I know. He looked at her steadily. Can you get the others to Ward 3? Yes. And then I need to get to the hangar. He was quiet for 3 seconds. Outside, the wind was doing something structural to the building. Not damaging, but the kind of constant pressure that made walls feel less permanent than they were. A fixture somewhere overhead gave a single metallic complaint. Carter, he said. Her last name, plain. Yeah. Your father, ghost line. Something moved across his face. I knew him. She hadn't expected that. Or she had, in the abstract way you expect a thing that has always been possible. But expecting it and hearing it were different experiences, and the difference landed somewhere behind her sternum. Then you know what he taught me, she said. I know what he was capable of. A pause. I never knew he had a daughter in the program. He didn't tell anyone. That was the condition. I trained under a different designation. He couldn't have the op compromised by personal connection. She heard herself say it the way she'd rehearsed saying it, clinically, without the part underneath it, which was that he'd been right, and she'd resented it for years anyway. He's gone, 3 years ago. Training accident is what the official record says. Reyes looked at her for a moment longer than the situation probably warranted. I'm sorry. I know. She meant it. Ward 3, then the hangar. He nodded once. That was enough. Moving 4 patients through a hospital while armed contacts were working through the East Corridor was an exercise in controlled speed which was different from rushing. Rushing made noise. Rushing made people fall. Rushing meant the woman with the frostbitten feet moved faster than her body could handle and went down in the hallway, and Ava had to get under her arm and take half her weight for 30 feet until they reached Ward 3's heavy door. Her name was Specialist Danver, 24, and she kept apologizing. Don't apologize, Ava said. Just keep moving. I'm slowing you down. You're not. She was marginally, but saying so was useless. 3 more steps and we're through the door. They got through the door. Webb was already inside. He'd moved himself off the gurney without being asked and had positioned himself beside the door with a fire extinguisher in his good hand, which wasn't a weapon, but was something. He looked at Ava when she came in supporting Danver. All of them? He asked. You're missing one. She counted the room. The 2 other SEAL casualties, both post-operative and limited in mobility. Danver. The training injury. A young corporal named Teague, who who had a broken arm and a cast and the expression of someone who had signed up for cold weather exercises and not for any of this. One more. Frostbite case from the East Wing. I'll go, Webb said. You won't. She looked at him directly. You have one working arm, and you just had surgery 8 hours ago. You'll stay here and you'll hold that door, and you'll use the extinguisher if someone comes through it that isn't me or Reyes or one of his team. Do you understand? He didn't like it. She could see him working through the argument. He was SEAL. He was trained. He had one functional arm and an IV site in the other, and he genuinely believed that made him an asset rather than a liability. She watched him reach the accurate conclusion. Yeah, he said. Good. She went back out. The fourth patient was a specialist named Abrams, 41, both feet wrapped and splinted, in a room 3 doors from Ward 3. She found him sitting up in bed with his room's overhead light off, which meant he'd heard something and had the sense to make himself less visible. She walked in and he looked at her and said nothing, just started moving. That was the kind of patient she liked. They made it back to Ward 3 in 4 minutes. She got Abrams situated, checked the room, and was at the door when she heard the sound from the east corridor. Not a gunshot, but voices, 2 of them, and neither belonged to anyone she knew. She closed Ward 3's door, turned the manual lock, looked at Webb. Stay quiet, she said. No matter what you hear. He nodded. She went out the opposite door, the one that faced west toward the maintenance corridor and the hangar access. The maintenance corridor was colder than the rest of the hospital. It ran along the building's exterior frame, and in these conditions, the insulation was losing its argument with the outside temperature. Her breath was visible. The lights here were the older fluorescent type, and one of them was flickering at the far end with the irregular rhythm of a dying ballast, throwing the whole corridor in and out of shadow. She moved fast and low, and she didn't let herself think about what was behind her. The hangar access was a heavy steel door with a key-coded lock. She had the code, part of her orientation materials, standard issue, and she punched it in with fingers that were already stiff from the cold. The door opened inward with a sound like something depressurizing. The hangar was enormous and dark, and the Jayhawk was sitting in the middle of it like something waiting to be argued with. It was still wearing its tie-down straps, and there was snow on the loading bay door's seal where the weather had found a gap. The temperature in here was maybe 25 degrees. Cold enough that she could feel it instantly through her scrub top, which was what she was wearing because she was a nurse and she'd been working a shift and no one plans for this. She found a maintenance locker near the wall and pulled out a heavy-duty work jacket, someone's personal item left behind, too big for her by a significant margin, and put it on without caring. She found a flashlight on the charging rack. She went to the helicopter. The pre-flight check she ran was the abbreviated version, the one her father had called the minimum viable inspection, a phrase that was supposed to sound efficient and actually meant enough to know if you're going to die before you leave the ground. She worked through it systematically: rotor head, blade ties, hydraulic reservoir sight glass, tail rotor linkage, fuel state. The fuel state was the first real problem. The Jayhawk had come in with the team, flown hard, and hadn't been refueled. She was at roughly 40%, which was workable for the distance to Dunmore if the weather cooperated and not workable if it didn't. She was checking the avionics panel, running through the cold soak initialization sequence that would take 8 minutes from a full cold start when she heard the sound. It was small. Behind her and to the left, near the maintenance workbench. She stopped, turned the flashlight. Lena Vogel was standing against the workbench. She was holding a radio, not a weapon, which was either good news or complicated news depending on what she'd already said into it. Her expression was a mixture of things that didn't resolve into anything clean. Fear, yes, but also something that looked like calculation. "Lena," Ava said. "Don't." Vogel's voice was strained. I didn't know they were going to come in armed. That wasn't... You opened the door. I was told it was an extraction team. I was told they were authorized." In the middle of a blackout blizzard, through the service entrance, Vogel's jaw tightened. She looked young, suddenly, not the composed administrative assistant she presented as, but younger, like someone who had said yes to something they understood was wrong and had been living with that decision right up until the moment it stopped being theoretical. "What did you transmit?" Ava said. "On that radio, before I came in." Silence. Lena, what did you transmit? Their position, Vogel said, inside the building, where the patients were consolidated, a pause that had the quality of something breaking. And the hangar. I told them about the hangar. The cold in the room seemed to settle differently after that. How many of them? Ava said. 4, maybe 5. She swallowed. There's a man named Driscoll. He's the one running it. The others follow him. What do they want? Vogel looked at her for a long moment. One of your patients, the SEAL in OR Petty Officer Doss. She said it like it cost her something. He's a witness to something that happened outside a forward base in the Bering deployment. Driscoll works for the people who don't want him to testify. Ava absorbed this. The whole shape of it, the timing, the weather, the specific positioning of armed men inside a hospital where a specific person was in surgery and couldn't be moved, rearranged itself into something that made a different kind of terrible sense. You were supposed to make sure he didn't make it out, Ava said. Vogel didn't answer, which was its own answer. Instead, you're in the hangar, Ava said. So either you changed your mind, or they cut you loose, or both. Both, Vogel said quietly. Driscoll said, I'd already done what I needed to do. He said, she stopped. He said loose ends are administrative. Ava looked at her for a moment. Vogel was scared enough to be truthful, which was something. And she was in the hangar, which meant she'd run here rather than back toward Driscoll's people, which was also something. Can you run basic avionics? Ava said. Vogel blinked. What? The co-pilot display. Can you read instrument feeds and call them out? I don't know the military terminology. I'll teach you the 4 readings I need, that's all. She held out the flashlight. Come here. Vogel came, slowly, then less slowly. She took the flashlight. The radio, Ava said. Vogel handed it over. Ava keyed it to the frequency Reyes had been using and transmitted. Reyes! Hangar. I have Vogel. 4 to 5 tangos. Leader named Driscoll. Target is Doss in OR. They have our position. She released the key and listened. 2 seconds of static. Then Reyes. Copy. We're already on Driscoll's team. 2 down, 2 unaccounted. Doss is secure. We need that bird ready in 8 minutes. Avionics sequence needs 8, she said. I started it when I came in. It'll be done when you get here. A pause. Holm took a round, left leg. He's ambulatory, but I heard you. Ambulatory means he walks to the bird. Do you copy? Copy. Another pause, shorter. Carter, the other 2 tangos, they're moving toward the hangar. She looked at the loading bay door at the far end of the hangar. It was sealed, but it was also the largest door in the building, and the lock on it was mechanical, not coded. How long? She said. 2 minutes, maybe less. She clipped the radio to the jacket's pocket and turned to Vogel. Listen to me very carefully. Vogel was listening. She had the focused, slightly dilated look of someone who had burned through panic and come out the other side into something that functioned. I'm going to start the engine sequence, Ava said. It's going to be loud and it's going to attract the men who are coming. When it gets loud, you stay below the instrument console and you don't move. If someone comes through that loading door before Reyes gets here, you don't engage, you don't speak. You make yourself as small and invisible as possible. Do you understand? What are you going to do? Ava looked at the hangar door, then at the workbench, then at the toolkit mounted to the wall above it. Something my father taught me, she said, which was not exactly an answer but was accurate. She crossed to the workbench. The 2 men came through the loading bay door 3 minutes and 40 seconds later, and by that point the Jayhawk's turbines were spinning up with the deep, building shriek of a cold start engine sequence, and the noise inside the hangar was enormous. The first man through the door moved in a shooter's stance and swept left, toward the sound, which was instinct and also a mistake because Ava was to the right, and she had spent those 3 minutes and 40 seconds not standing in one place. What happened next took 11 seconds and involved a hydraulic floor jack, a tie-down chain, and the specific application of knowledge her father had quietly insisted she develop alongside the flight training. Because being able to fly meant nothing if you couldn't protect yourself on the ground. It wasn't clean. Her shoulder took something during it. She didn't know what, She registered it the way you register damage in a moment where damage is irrelevant, and the second man was larger than she'd estimated, and she had to improvise the last 4 seconds in a way that left her breathing hard against the hangar wall, with a chain in both hands and a situation that had been solved but not elegantly. She stood up straight, breathed. The turbines were still spooling. The instrument sequence was 90 seconds from complete. The hangar side door opened, the interior one from the maintenance corridor, and Reyes came through with 3 of his men and a 4th figure who was moving with the lurching, careful stride of someone managing a leg wound. Holm, jaw set, hand on the wall, moving anyway. Reyes looked at the 2 men on the hangar floor. He looked at Ava. She was still holding the chain. Her shoulder hurt in a way that was going to be a significant problem in approximately 40 minutes once the adrenaline finished its work. "The turbines are running," she said. 90 seconds to full instrument readiness. We need to load now." Reyes didn't ask about the 2 men on the floor. He looked at her for exactly 1 second with an expression she couldn't fully categorize. It was somewhere between reassessment and something older, something that had a name she wasn't prepared to deal with right now. "Load up," he said to his team. Then he looked back at Ava. "Driscoll is contained. Vogel is in custody. Doss is secure and they're bringing him out of OR now." He paused. "You have one problem." She knew what he was going to say before he said it. "Harmon locked the OR from the inside when the breach happened," Reyes said. "He won't open the door. He doesn't believe the Jayhawk can fly." She looked at the helicopter, then at the clock on the instrument panel. "Harmon's going to get everyone killed," she said. "Yeah," Reyes said. "So convince him." She was already moving toward the interior door when the first section of the loading bay ceiling made a sound none of them had heard before. A long, low, structural groan that rolled across the hangar like something announcing itself. The snow load on the roof had been building for hours, and now the roof was starting to answer. The groan from the roof didn't repeat immediately, which was almost worse. It settled into silence and left everyone in the hangar standing with that sound still living in their chests, waiting to find out if it had been a warning or a prelude. Ava didn't wait to find out. She went through the interior door at a run, back into the maintenance corridor, back into the cold that had gotten colder in the time she'd been in the hangar. The building's heating system was running on battery backup now, which meant it wasn't really running, which meant the temperature inside St. Eldridge was going to become a clinical problem inside the next 30 minutes for anyone who wasn't moving. She counted the patients as she moved. The Ward 3 cases were manageable. The problem was Doss, who was post-surgical and couldn't be considered stable by any metric she trusted, and who was behind a door that Harmon had locked because Harmon had decided that a locked door was safer than a grounded helicopter and a nurse who said she could fly it. She understood the logic. She didn't have time to respect it. The OR corridor was the oldest section of the hospital, built in the original construction, before the 2 expansion wings, with lower ceilings and narrower walls and a specific smell of antiseptic and recycled air that was different from the rest of the building. She'd been down here 3 times in 11 days. She knew there was a wall-mounted intercom outside OR1 that connected to a panel inside, and she knew that Harmon monitored it because she'd watched him use it twice during the morning shift. She hit the intercom button and held it. "Dr. Harmon, it's Carter. Open the door." Static. Then, "This is not the time, Nurse Carter. Doss needs to be moved. Reyes says his team is pulling him out of recovery now. Is there someone in there with him, or is he alone?" A pause. "Nurse Delacroix is with him. He's not stable enough to be moved. He's less stable if the roof comes down on him." She kept her voice controlled. The particular register that she'd learned didn't provoke people into defending themselves. "Harmon, I need you to listen to me for 30 seconds without deciding anything. Can you do that?" Another pause, longer. "The Jayhawk's turbines are running," she said. "The instrument sequence is completing now. The threat inside the building is contained. Reyes has Driscoll and the others secured. But we have a structural issue developing in the hangar section, and we have 40% fuel, which gives us a flight window to Dunmore that closes in approximately 20 minutes because of the storm's progression." She took a breath. "If we don't move in 20 minutes, we don't move. The road is gone. The radio relay is down. The generator is on battery that won't last the night. If we stay here, we are making a decision for everyone in this building, and I need you to understand that before you make it." Silence. The intercom hissed. "You can't fly that aircraft," Harmon said. But the certainty in it had changed texture. It was thinner now, the certainty of a man who was still arguing a position he'd started to doubt. "I can," she said. "Reyes believes me. His team believes me. I need you to move Doss to the loading position outside OR and let Reyes people take him to the hangar. That's all I'm asking you to do. If he dehisces during transport, then we manage it. Dehiscence is survivable. A collapsed roof in a storm with no heat and no radio is a different category of problem." The intercom went quiet. She waited. Behind her, somewhere in the east wing, something fell. Not structural, something smaller. A supply cart or a shelf giving way under the vibration of the wind load, but the sound moved through the building like a small announcement. The OR door unlocked. Harmon came out first. He looked like a man who had aged in the last 2 hours. Not the confident senior physician who had dismissed her concerns that morning, but someone carrying the specific weight of having been wrong about something that mattered. He looked at her and didn't say anything for a moment. "How bad is the roof?" he said. "I don't know yet. The groan we heard could be settling, could be initial failure. The snow load has been accumulating for 6 hours. She was already looking past him at Doss on the gurney, where Nurse Delacroix, a compact, efficient woman in her 30s who Ava had always liked, was checking the IV line with the practiced speed of someone who had already made her decision before the door opened. "His pressure?" 94/60, Delacroix said. "It's been stable for the last 40 minutes, but he's still under sedation. He's going to be confused when he comes up." "I know. We'll manage it in the air." Ava moved to the gurney and did a fast visual. The dressing was intact, no seepage. The drainage line was capped. Not ideal transport conditions, survivable ones. "We move now." Harmon put his hand on the gurney rail, not stopping them, holding on like a man who needed something to grip. "Carter," he said. She looked at him. "I owe you an apology." He said it badly, like someone who didn't practice apologies and knew it. "I've been—" "Later," she said, not unkindly. "Apology received. Let's go." The logistics of moving 6 patients, 3 mobile SEALs, 2 medical staff, Harmon, and Vogel to the hangar in under 15 minutes was the kind of problem that had a solution only if everyone stopped asking questions and started moving in the right direction. Ava had seen mass casualty coordination twice in her training. Controlled simulations, nothing like this. And what she remembered most was that the people who slowed everything down were never the ones who panicked. They were the ones who stopped to confirm things they already knew. Reyes had the mobile patients moving before she got back to the hangar. Holm was seated inside the Jayhawk's cabin with his leg extended and his jaw set at an angle that said he was managing pain by refusing to acknowledge it. Webb had somehow made it to the hangar under his own power, which was either impressive or medically inadvisable, and probably both, and was sitting against the hangar wall letting Delacroix adjust his dressing without comment. The 2 men from the loading bay floor were zip-tied to a workbench support column. One of them was conscious and looking at the helicopter with the expression of someone revising their expectations. The other was still down. Driscoll was a separate problem. He was in the corner of the hangar near the fuel cabinet, conscious, secured, with a split above his left eye that suggested he and Reyes had had a disagreement that was now resolved. He was maybe 50, compact and gray-haired, with the look of someone who had spent a long time doing something adjacent to legitimate that had gradually become something else. He watched everything with flat professional attention, like a man filing information for later use. Ava looked at him once. He looked back. "The nurse," he said. She turned away and went to the helicopter. Vogel was still at the co-pilot console where Ava had left her, which was surprising until it wasn't. She had nowhere else to go and she knew it. And whatever calculation she was running about her own situation had apparently landed her on be useful as the best available option. She had the instrument feed cheat sheet that Ava had written on the back of a maintenance log in her hand, and she was reading it with the focus of someone doing emergency compression. "Altitude tape is the left vertical," Ava told her, climbing into the left seat. "Torque gauge is the center cluster. The dial with the green band. Airspeed is upper right. When I ask for a reading, I need all three in that order. Altitude, torque, airspeed, Vogel said. Every 90 seconds once we're airborne. Don't wait for me to ask after the first one. Okay. Ava ran the instrument panel fast. The cold soak sequence had completed. Everything was reading in range. The rotor was at idle RPM and needed to be brought up to operating speed before they could lift. She had estimated 14 minutes for pre-flight, and she had used most of them. The fuel state read 39%, which was 1% less than when she'd checked it, which meant the auxiliary heater she'd run during the sequence had burned more than she'd calculated. She adjusted the routing in her head. Direct line to Dunmore at reduced cruise speed to manage fuel burn. It would add 4 minutes to the flight and bring them in with maybe 8% reserve, which was not a comfortable margin in instrument conditions during a blizzard. It was a margin. Reyes appeared at the cockpit door. We're loading. 7 minutes. I need 5 to bring the rotor up. You've got them. He looked at the instrument panel, then at her. Not checking her work. He didn't have the background for that. He was doing something else. Something that was about reading her rather than reading the gauges. You've done this before, he said. Flown a Jayhawk? Flown something this bad? She kept her hands moving through the startup sequence. Once. Weather conditions were worse. Aircraft was older. A pause. We landed. He made the sound that wasn't quite a laugh again. Good answer. 7 minutes, she said. Please. He left. The roof made the sound again at the 4-minute mark. Not a groan this time. Something shorter and sharper. A crack that moved from the loading bay side toward the center of the hangar in a way that was directional enough to track. Every person in the hangar heard it. The loading paused for one beat, the involuntary freeze of bodies responding to a sound that meant danger before the mind finished processing it. Keep moving, Reyes said, and they kept moving. Ava brought the rotor to operational speed and watched the vibration settle into the airframe. The specific frequency of a Jayhawk at idle was something her body remembered before her mind did. 3 years of absence, and it was still in her hands, in her shoulders, in the way she calibrated her grip on the collective. Her father had said once that flying was mostly memory and the rest was mathematics. She'd argued with him about it at the time because she was 19 and she argued with everything he said. He'd been right. The shoulder was getting louder. Whatever she'd taken in the hangar during the engagement with Driscoll's men had settled into something that was going to require attention, and the motion of her right arm through the startup sequence was costing her in a way she was managing by not thinking about it directly. She could think about it when they landed. The loading door opened. The large one, the exterior one, and the blizzard came in like it had been waiting for the invitation. The temperature inside the hangar dropped 10 degrees in 60 seconds. Snow came in horizontal, swirling in the rotor wash, and the world outside the loading bay was white and gray and moving and absolutely without feature. Ava looked at it. She had flown in whiteout conditions twice. Once in training, in a simulator that her father had repeatedly said undersold the actual experience, and once in an actual aircraft in actual conditions over the Cascades that she wasn't officially supposed to have been in. The simulator had been right. The real thing was worse. The spatial disorientation that whiteout produced was not something you could fully simulate because it operated on something below cognition. A physical vertigo that the instruments contradicted, but the body didn't believe. You flew the instruments. You flew them the way you flew nothing else in your life. Completely, without reservation, without the half-second of checking what you felt that most pilots allowed themselves. You trusted the gauges over your own perception, and you did it every second for the entire flight because the second you stopped was the second you died. She had explained this to exactly no one. It didn't seem helpful. Last patient loaded, Reyes called from the cabin. Harmon's in, Delacroix's in, we're at capacity. Copy. Close the cabin door and brace. She didn't look back. She heard the door close. She heard the varied sounds of people finding positions in a military medical transport that was not designed for the number of bodies currently occupying it. She heard Holmes say something to Webb in a low voice, and Webb say something back. She heard Doss, somewhere in the back, beginning to surface from sedation. A confused sound, not words yet. Vogel, she said. Ready. Ava brought the collective up. The Jayhawk lifted off the hangar floor in a controlled, imperfect motion. Not smooth, because cold hydraulics and a heavy load and one-handed compensation for a shoulder that was actively complaining produced something that was controlled rather than graceful, and controlled was sufficient. The skids cleared the floor by 4 feet, 6 feet, and she held it there, adjusting the pedals, feeling the aircraft find its trim point in the rotor wash that bounced off the hangar walls. The loading bay door was open. Outside was the Alaskan storm. She took the aircraft forward and into the white. The first 30 seconds of the flight were the most technically demanding 30 seconds of her life, which was not a category she'd expected to be revising upward today. The wind hit the aircraft like a physical thing, not a gust, a sustained lateral pressure that wanted to rotate the nose 20 degrees right, and had the authority to do it if she didn't respond precisely and immediately. She responded. Her feet worked the anti-torque pedals in the fast, small corrections that Jayhawk pilots called chasing the trim, which her father had told her was a name that made it sound easier than it was. She understood that now in her body in a way she hadn't when he'd said it. Altitude, she said, Bechinam, 60 feet. Torque reads in the green. Airspeed 40 knots. Too slow. She needed 70 knots for the aerodynamics to work properly in these conditions. Below that, the aircraft was fighting itself. She pushed the nose forward and the airspeed began to climb, and the turbulence increased, and somewhere in the cabin something shifted and Delacroix said something sharp to someone who needed to stop moving. Altitude. 80 feet, torque still green, airspeed 62. She climbed to 120 feet and held it. Below that, terrain was a risk she couldn't assess in zero visibility. Above that, the wind was worse and the fuel burn increased. She had run this calculation on the ground, and the answer had not been comfortable then. It was less comfortable now with the airspeed fluctuating and the wind doing things that the panel's readings were 50% confident about. Where's the terrain? Reyes was leaning into the cockpit doorway. He'd positioned himself there without being invited, which she'd have been annoyed about at any other moment. We're above it, she said. How do you know? I filed the terrain elevation when I did the pre-flight. St. Eldridge's pad elevation is 1,400 feet above sea level. The Dunmore corridor runs at 1,300. We're at 1,520. We have clearance. She paused. Sit down. Are we going to make it? Sit down, Reyes. He sat down. The airspeed hit 70 knots, and she felt the aircraft change. The turbulence didn't stop, but it became something the helicopter was pushing through rather than being pushed by, which was a distinction that mattered both aerodynamically and in the part of her brain that was managing the information she didn't pass along to the cabin. The FELIR system was running with its 2-second thermal lag, and through it she could see terrain heat signatures below, the ground, the tree line, the specific texture of geography under 4 feet of snow, and she was building a spatial picture out of those fragments the way she'd been taught to do, assembling the flight environment from instruments and thermal return and the mathematics of wind speed versus heading correction. It was working. It was working badly and effortfully, and with the constant nagging awareness that fuel burn was above projected rate because of the wind compensation, but it was working. Altitude. 140. Torque still green? Wait. Vogel's voice changed. Torque is moving. It just went above the green. Ava looked at the torque gauge. The needle was at the upper limit of the green band and climbing. She ran the cause analysis in approximately 2 seconds. Not mechanical. The load. The weight in the cabin was slightly above what she'd calculated, and the wind compensation was pulling additional power from the transmission, and the two together were pushing the torque reading toward the yellow band. Yellow wasn't an emergency. It was a warning. It meant the transmission was working harder than it was designed to work continuously. And if it stayed there, continuously, for the 43 minutes remaining in the flight at current speed, she needed to reduce weight or reduce wind compensation. Reducing wind compensation meant accepting more heading variation, which at this visibility and this terrain meant accepting risk that wasn't manageable. Reducing weight meant she was still running the calculation when Reyes appeared in the doorway again and said quietly, "What's wrong?" Not a question. He was reading the instrument panel and the particular set of her shoulders. "Torque is high," she said. "The transmission is working outside optimal range. I'm managing it." "How?" I'm going to increase altitude by 200 feet and reduce airspeed by 8 knots. It'll extend the flight by 6 minutes but lower the power demand. She was already beginning the maneuver. We'll arrive with less fuel reserve than I'd like. How much less? She didn't answer immediately. Carter, how much? 4%, she said. Maybe 3. Reyes was quiet for a moment. Behind him, somewhere in the cabin, Doss was talking now. Confused, asking where he was, asking for home. She could hear Holmes' voice answering him, patient, low. You're in a helicopter. We're going home. 3% reserve, Reyes said. Is that enough? It's enough if the headwind doesn't increase, she said. If it does, the aircraft lurched. Not turbulence, something sharper. A change in rotor RPM. A drop in recovery that lasted less than 2 seconds but moved through the cabin like a wave. Someone in the back said something she couldn't hear over the turbines. Vogel's voice was careful and too controlled. Torque went into the yellow. Ava looked at the gauge. Yellow. Not red. Yellow. The transmission working beyond design parameters, still functional, still producing power, doing it in a way that had a time limit she couldn't precisely calculate. She ran the numbers: speed, distance, fuel state, torque load, wind compensation. The weight behind her that was 9 people and their futures. There was a landing option, a flat ridge she'd noted on the terrain profile, 11 miles short of Dunmore, elevation 1380, clear of the worst trees. If she put the aircraft down there, they were 11 miles from safety in a blizzard, but they were on the ground, and the transmission wasn't failing in the air. If she kept flying, they had a chance at Dunmore. A real chance. The torque was in the yellow, not the red, and yellow wasn't catastrophe. It was warning, and warnings existed because there was still time to respond to them. She had 32 minutes of flight remaining. She ran the number again because it was the kind of number you ran twice, and the torque gauge moved. Not far, not into the red, into the upper yellow, needle trembling at the border, and the transmission note changed slightly, not dramatically, not the sounds that preceded failure in the case studies she'd studied, but different from what it had been 60 seconds ago. She had run the number correctly both times, and the number didn't get better with repetition. Reyes, she said. Yeah, I need you to be honest with me about something. Go. Doss, she said. His condition. If we set down short of Dunmore, if we're on the ground for 2-3 hours waiting for rescue, what's his realistic outcome? She heard Reyes calculate. She heard him move back into the cabin and say something to Delacroix, and hear Delacroix's response, which she couldn't make out over the engines. He came back. Delacroix says his temperature is dropping faster than it should. The cabin heat is... I know, the heating system has been on minimum power since we lifted. She had routed everything she could to the transmission and rotor systems. There was nothing left for supplemental cabin heat. If we're on the ground in open terrain, she says 3 hours in current conditions is the outside limit before it's a different conversation. Ava looked at the instrument panel, at the torque gauge with its trembling needle. Okay, she said. Okay, what? We're not setting down. She adjusted her grip on the collective. Her shoulder sent a signal she filed and ignored. I need you back in your seat. Brace everyone. It's going to get rougher for the next 15 minutes, and then it's going to smooth out. How do you know it'll smooth out? I don't, she said, but I need everyone braced, so please tell them that regardless. Reyes looked at her for exactly the time it took to decide something. Bracing, he said, and went back into the cabin. Ava turned back to the white wall in front of her. The instruments. The numbers. The trembling needle that was not yet in the red and might stay out of the red if she flew this aircraft with a precision she had been trained for and had never applied to anything that mattered quite this much. Her father had told her once, sitting in a hangar not entirely unlike the one she'd just left, that the hardest part of flight wasn't the skill. The skill was learnable. The hardest part was the moment when you understood the full weight of what you were carrying and you kept flying anyway. She'd been 18. She'd thought she understood what he meant. The torque needle climbed one more increment, held, and then, slowly, in the incremental way that gauges moved when they were telling you something was still possible but wouldn't be for long, it reached the red line mark and stopped. exactly at the border. Holding. For now. The needle held at the red line for 4 minutes and 30 seconds, which was the longest 4 minutes and 30 seconds of Ava Carter's life. And she spent every one of them flying with the particular stillness of someone who understood that any unnecessary movement transferred load to a system that was already at its limit. She didn't talk. Vogel called the readings every 90 seconds the way she'd been told to, her voice steady in a way that suggested she was managing herself by the discipline of the task, which was exactly what Ava had intended when she'd given her the job. The cabin behind them was quiet in the way that people got quiet when they knew something was wrong and had made the collective decision not to ask about it. The wind didn't let up. It shifted direction twice in the first 10 minutes, which cost her on heading correction and therefore on torque. And both times the needle moved up a fraction, and both times she made the adjustments that brought it back to the line and held it there. It was like holding a weight at arm's length. The physical act was simple. The duration was what made it impossible. And she was now 22 minutes into holding it. Her shoulder had stopped sending sharp signals and moved into a constant background noise that she'd compartmentalized so completely she'd almost stopped perceiving it. Almost. Altitude, she said. 160. Torque at the line. Airspeed 68. 2 knots below where she wanted it. She nudged the collective and the airspeed came up and the torque needle moved up with it, and she brought the collective back down to exactly where it had been and accepted the 2-knot deficit. Math over preference. That was the whole flight. At minute 26, the terrain profile changed. She felt it before she saw it on the FLIR. A change in the turbulence character, the particular smoothing that happened when you cleared a ridgeline and the wind stopped having geography to amplify it. The Dunmore corridor was in a shallow valley, protected on 3 sides by the ridge system she'd been navigating the edge of, and dropping into it from the north meant passing through a transition zone where the wind suddenly had less to push against. The aircraft steadied. The torque needle dropped 2 increments below the red line. She exhaled through her nose, the smallest possible version of relief, and kept flying. "Torque is at upper yellow," Vogel said, and there was something in her voice that wasn't quite professional. A crack of something real underneath it. "I see it," Ava said. "You're doing well." Vogel didn't answer, which was the right response. 11 minutes later, through the FLIR, and then through the actual windshield as the snow density decreased slightly in the valley's shelter, Ava saw lights, diffuse, scattered, the orange and white of a military installation's perimeter and landing grid, but lights. Unmistakable. She keyed the radio to Dunmore's frequency. "Dunmore Control, this is Jayhawk November 7-4, inbound from St. Eldridge. Declare minimum fuel and medical emergency, require immediate landing clearance and trauma team on pad." Static. Then a voice, crisp and alert, the voice of someone who had been watching a radio for hours. "November 7-4, Dunmore Control, we have you on radar. You are cleared immediate approach, pad 2. Trauma team is standing by. Say souls on board. 11 souls, 3 critical, 1 post-surgical. Copy 11 souls, pad 2 is lit. Wind is 240 at 18, gusting 26. You are cleared to land." She came down through 200 feet, 150, 100, the lights resolving from diffuse to distinct, the pad grid appearing through the snow as a pattern of green and white that was the most specific thing she'd seen in 40 minutes. The wind gusted once at the 50-foot mark and pushed the nose left, and she corrected, and the correction was coarser than she'd have liked because her shoulder finally registered its full objection, and her right arm didn't move as precisely as she needed it to. The Jayhawk touched down hard on the right skid first, bounced once, and settled. Not a good landing, not a landing she'd have accepted in training. She sat with her hands on the controls for a full 3 seconds after touchdown, feeling the aircraft settle before she brought the throttle to idle. "Vogel," she said. "Yeah. We're down." Vogel made a sound she probably hadn't intended to make. Then she said, "Yes, we are," in a voice that was trying to be composed and mostly succeeding. Ava released the collective and looked at her right hand, which was shaking. She made a fist, and it stopped. She made note of that for later and opened the cockpit door. The next 40 minutes were loud and procedural, and she was only partially present for them in the way you were partially present for things that happened after the thing that required all of you had ended. Trauma teams came out of the installation's medical building at a run. Doss went first, Holmes second, Webb third. The three of them on gurneys or under support, moving fast through the blowing snow toward the doors. Delacroix was briefing the receiving team as she walked alongside Doss, her voice precise and rapid with handoff information, doing the job the way Ava had always seen her do it. Harmon was there too, and he looked diminished in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. He looked like a man who'd spent the last hour revising his understanding of several things he'd thought were settled. Someone put a thermal blanket around Ava's shoulders. She realized she was standing at the edge of the pad with her arms at her sides, and no particular plan, which wasn't like her. And she recognized it as the specific blankness that followed sustained high-stakes functioning. She'd experienced it twice in training. Her father had called it the bill coming due. You spent everything you had, and then you stood somewhere warm and let your body figure out what was left. A medic appeared in front of her, young, serious, with a kit in his hand. "Ma'am, are you injured?" "Shoulder," she said. "Right. Something happened during... It'll need imaging." "Can you walk?" "I've been walking." She followed him toward the doors. Reyes was inside, near the entrance, talking to a man in a naval officer's uniform that had more rank on it than she'd expected to see at a forward installation. He saw her come in and said something to the officer, who turned. Rear Admiral Constance Marrow was 61 years old and had the build of someone who had remained physically capable long past the point where most people in her position stopped bothering. She had short silver hair and eyes that moved across Ava the way a sensor moved across a target. Not hostile, but complete. Taking inventory. Ava had seen photographs of Marrow in one file, one time, 3 years ago. The file had been part of her father's records, and Marrow's name had appeared in it 3 times without context. The kind of appearance that suggested operational connection without explaining it. "Nurse Carter," Marrow said. "Admiral." "How's the aircraft?" It was not the question she'd expected. She'd expected something procedural. The situation report, the patient status, the accounting of what had happened at St. Eldridge. Instead, the aircraft. Transmission took sustained high-torque load for approximately 23 minutes, Ava said. It should be pulled for inspection before the next flight. The fuel state is below minimum reserve. We came in at just under 3%. She paused. The FLIR system has a thermal lag issue that needs to be addressed. It's a safety risk in those conditions. Marrow looked at her for a moment. "Reyes tells me you flew it through a Category 2 whiteout with 11 souls and a compromised transmission." "Yes, ma'am." "He also tells me you identified a hostile inside the facility, neutralized 2 armed contacts in the hangar, coordinated patient consolidation, and convinced a senior physician to unlock a door by making a 30-second argument through an intercom." A pause. "While managing a shoulder injury?" Ava said nothing. "I knew your father," Marrow said. "I know. He told me about you once." Well, she said it in the way people said things they'd held for a while. "He told me you were better than him. I told him that was impossible." She looked at Ava directly. "I was wrong about that too." The medic reappeared at Ava's elbow with pointed patience. She let him steer her toward the medical wing. "Gosh." The imaging showed a separated AC joint, the acromioclavicular, the connection between the collarbone and the shoulder blade, which the receiving physician described as a grade 2 separation and then looked at her for a reaction. She told him it hurt about a 6. He told her it was typically described as significantly more painful than that, and she told him she'd been managing it for the last hour and would like the sling now, please. He gave her the sling. She was in it, sitting in the medical bay with a cold pack and the specific tiredness of the aftermath when Reyes came in. He had a cut on his chin that had been closed with 2 strips of tape, and he was moving with the slight guardedness of a man whose body had several opinions it hadn't expressed yet. He sat down across from her without being invited, which she'd stopped registering as unusual. "Driscoll is in federal custody," he said. "Marrow had a team mobilized before we landed. They were already moving based on the radio transmissions we sent from the hangar. Driscoll, his people, and the 2 at the workbench. And Vogel. His expression shifted on that one. "She's cooperating. She gave them names, operational details, the full communication chain. She says she was recruited 14 months ago, told it was intelligence work. That the line between what she was doing and what she understood she was doing moved gradually. He paused. I don't know if that's true. Some of it probably is, Ava said. That's usually how it works. Yeah. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. DOS is stable. Surgeon here says the transport didn't compromise the repair. Delacroix's handoff was good. He paused. Holmes going to need a real OR for the leg. Webb's dressing held. I know. I checked before they moved him. He looked at her with the particular expression she'd been seeing from him for the last several hours. The recalibration one. The one that had been slowly revising whatever initial category he'd filed her under. You should sleep, he said. Probably. Is there anything you need? She thought about it honestly. To know what happened to Harmon. Reyes's expression did something complicated. He's down the hall. He asked about you twice while you were in imaging. He picked at the tape on his chin. Unconscious habit, she noted, not something he knew he was doing. He's not a bad man. He spent a long time being the most important person in the room, she said. It makes the room feel smaller than it is. Reyes looked at her. Is that what it is? In my experience. He stood up, and for a moment he just stood there, which was slightly unlike him. Reyes was a man who moved with purpose, and the pause was conspicuous. You knew we were going to doubt you. Before this started, you knew how it was going to go. I know how things usually go, she said, and you came anyway. Someone had to. He absorbed that. Then he said, without preface, Your father saved 11 members of my first team in a situation that had nothing to do with flying. He said it simply, without embellishment. I never got to tell him what that meant. Ava looked at the cold pack on her shoulder, at the sling, at her left hand, which was resting on her knee, and looked in this light like her father's hand. The same proportions, the same way the fingers rested when she wasn't thinking about them. He knew, she said. He always knew. Reyes nodded once. He left. The debrief happened in 2 parts. The first part was procedural. A JAG officer with a recording device and a list of questions about St. Eldridge, the breach, Driscoll's people, the hangar engagement. Ava answered everything accurately and without embellishment, and the JAG officer wrote things down and occasionally asked follow-up questions that suggested he'd been briefed on some of what had happened but was still assembling the sequence. She walked him through it. She didn't make it sound better than it was. The shoulder, the torque gauge, the landing that had come in hard on the right skid, and the JAG officer, to his credit, didn't look surprised by any of it. The second part was different. Merrow came in without the JAG officer, without a recording device, without the particular energy of an official proceeding. She sat across from Ava with a plain folder and a cup of coffee that she didn't offer to share, and she put the folder on the table. I need to tell you some things, Merrow said, about your father's file, about why you were at St. Eldridge. Ava went still. I was assigned there through normal rotation. You were placed there, Merrow said, by me, 6 weeks ago. The room didn't change. The medical bay had the same light, the same background noise of the installation's ventilation, the same cold pack losing its cold against her shoulder. None of it changed. She heard the sentence and sat with it for a moment. Why? She said. Because Doss was going to be at St. Eldridge for his post-op recovery, and I had intelligence suggesting he was a target. And I needed someone at that facility who could handle what happened if the intelligence was right. Merrow opened the folder. I needed someone who could fly the extraction aircraft if the primary pilot was compromised. I needed someone who could manage the medical side and the tactical side simultaneously. I needed someone who would not panic and who would not fold when the people around her decided she couldn't do what she was actually trained to do. Ava looked at her. You put me there knowing there would be an attack. I put you there knowing there might be one. There's a difference. A smaller one than you'd like. Merrow didn't deny it. Your father's program, SEAL Team 9 flight program, Alpha Rotation, was never fully decommissioned. It was reclassified. The people who went through it carry a designation that doesn't appear in standard personnel records. You are the only active duty medical officer currently carrying that designation. She looked at Ava directly. I needed the right person in that building. Ava sat with this. She did it the way she sat with most difficult things. Not fighting it, not accepting it, just holding it and looking at its shape. Did you know about Vogel? She said. I suspected. We had partial intelligence on Driscoll's network indicating a placement inside the facility, but we couldn't confirm identity before your deployment. A pause. We thought it might be Price. So did I for a while. You identified Vogel faster than my analyst did. I was standing in the hallway when she found me, Ava said. It wasn't analysis. It was geometry. Marrow almost smiled, not quite. Your father used to say things like that. I know, I probably got it from him. She looked at the folder. What's in there? Marrow turned it around and slid it across the table. Inside was a single document, 4 pages, partially redacted, with her name in the header and the SEAL Team 9 program designation below it. Behind it was a second document, shorter, with the word commendation at the top and Marrow's signature at the bottom, dated today. And behind that, on a small piece of acid-free paper sealed in a clear sleeve, was something she recognized before she fully processed what she was seeing. A patch, small, embroidered, with the specific design she'd seen exactly once before. On her father's left shoulder, in a photograph that hadn't been authorized for printing but that he'd kept in his desk drawer anyway. The SEAL Team 9 flight program patch. Her hands didn't shake. She was proud of that. That belonged to your father, Marrow said. He gave it to me before his last deployment. He said... She stopped. It was the first moment in the entire conversation that Marrow had stopped herself, and it was visible. He said if something happened to him, he wanted it to go to the person who earned it. He told me who that would be. She looked at Ava. He was specific. Ava looked at the patch in its sleeve, at the 4 pages of documentation, at the commendation with today's date. She was 30 seconds from something she didn't want to do in front of a rear admiral, and she recognized it and filed it and held the line. There's one more thing, Marrow said, and her voice had changed slightly. About Driscoll. Ava looked up. His operation, the reason he wanted Doss. Marrow's expression was careful. Doss witnessed an incident in the Bering deployment. That's accurate, and it's the reason he was targeted. But Driscoll isn't independent. He works for a contracting organization called Ardmore Group. They run logistics and security operations in 3 forward deployment zones. She paused. Ardmore Group's senior operations officer is a man named Theodore Voss. The name didn't mean anything to her. She said so. It should, Marrow said, because Theodore Voss was the contracting officer attached to the training operation where your father died. She kept her voice level. The training accident assessment was reviewed 6 months ago, following intelligence that came through a separate investigation. The review is classified, but I can tell you this. The assessment has been reopened. Ava looked at her. What does reopened mean? She said. Her voice was very even. It means the investigation into your father's death is active, Marrow said. And it means that Driscoll, who is in federal custody right now tonight, is connected to the organization that was present when James Carter died. The folder was still open in front of her, the patch in its sleeve, her father's handwriting on the back of the photograph, visible through the clear plastic, the 2 words he'd written there that she'd memorized the first time she'd seen them and never needed to look at again. For Ava. She looked at Marrow. I want to be involved, she said. I know you do. I'm telling you I want to be involved in the investigation. Formally. Whatever designation or clearance that requires. Carter, he put me in that hospital, she said. Not you. Him. He trained me for 11 years so that I could handle exactly what happened tonight. And the reason he could do that, the reason he had the time, is because he thought it was over. He thought the organization that killed him was finished. She kept her voice level because she'd been keeping it level for the last 4 hours, and she knew how. If it's not finished, I want to be part of finishing it. Marrow looked at her for a long moment. The ventilation hummed. Somewhere down the hall, someone was on a phone, their voice a distant rhythm without words. There's a briefing at 0700, Marrow said. I'll make sure you're on the list. Ava nodded. She looked back at the folder, and then the medic knocked and opened the door and said, in the slightly apologetic tone of someone interrupting something he didn't fully understand. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. There's a situation in Post-Op Bay 2. Dr. Harmon is asking for Nurse Carter specifically." Ava closed the folder, stood, adjusted the sling. "What kind of situation?" she said. It's not a medical one." He looked uncomfortable. "Petty Officer Doss is awake. He's talking. He says he has information that can't wait for the official debrief." He paused. "He's saying there's a fourth member of Driscoll's team, someone who wasn't at St. Eldridge." Ava went still. "Someone who was never at St. Eldridge," the medic said, "because they were already here, at Dunmore, before we landed." The hallway outside was the same hallway it had been 30 seconds ago. The installation beyond it was the same installation, but the shape of the night had just changed, and she could feel it change, the way you feel a pressure shift before you hear the thunder. She looked at Marrow. Marrow was already on her feet. They moved fast down the corridor, Marrow half a step ahead and already on her radio, calling the security desk at Dunmore's main entrance with the clipped authority of someone who had given urgent orders enough times that urgency didn't require volume. Ava kept pace. Her shoulder said what it had been saying for the last hour, and she filed it in the same place. Post-Op Bay 2 was 3 turns from the medical wing's main corridor, and by the time they got there, 2 of Marrow's security detail were already posted outside the door. Inside, Doss was propped at 30 degrees in his bed, pale and IV connected, and more alert than anyone who'd been under general anesthesia 4 hours ago had any right to be. Harmon was standing near the window. Delacroix was at the monitor. Doss looked at Ava when she came in. He looked at her the way people sometimes looked at her in these situations, with the specific recognition of someone who'd been briefed on a name and was now matching it to a face and finding the match surprising for reasons he was too professional to say out loud. "You're Carter," he said. "Yeah." "Reyes said you flew us out." "Reyes talks too much." She moved to the bedside and checked his color, his IV site, the monitor. His pressure was low normal, which was acceptable for post-surgical. His eyes were tracking well. "Tell me about the fourth contact." Doss shifted slightly, winced. "His name is Garrett Fossey. He was attached to Ardmore Group as a logistics coordinator. I knew him from the Bering deployment. When the incident happened, the one I witnessed, Fossey was the one who filed the initial after-action. He's the reason the official record doesn't match what actually happened." He paused to breathe, and it cost him. 2 weeks ago, I got word through back channels that he was here, at Dunmore. He'd been assigned to the installation's contracting oversight office 6 weeks ago. The same window as Vogel's arrival. The same window as Ava's placement. "Marrow," Ava said without turning. "I heard. Marrow was already on a second call. Get me the contracting oversight roster for the last 60 days. Cross-reference Ardmore Group affiliations. Right now." Doss looked at Ava. "If Fossey knows I made it out of St. Eldridge..." "He knows," Ava said. "The landing was logged. Patient manifest was transmitted to Dunmore Control before we touched down." She looked at his monitor again. "You can't be moved." "I know. Which means we need to find him before he decides the problem needs a different solution." Doss looked at her steadily. He was in pain and post-surgical, and he was still making the calculation clearly, which told her something about what kind of operator he'd been before all this. "How long do you need?" "As little as possible." She looked at Delacroix. "Don't leave this room." "Wasn't planning to," Delacroix said, which was the right answer. Ava went back to the corridor. The contracting oversight office was in Dunmore's administrative building, a separate structure connected to the main installation by a covered walkway that was, in current conditions, a wind tunnel with pretensions. Marrow had 3 security personnel moving toward it. Ava moved with them, and Marrow didn't tell her not to, which was tacit permission or tactical oversight, and it didn't matter which. The walkway took 90 seconds. The administrative building's lobby was unmanned at this hour, lit by the low-energy overnight lighting that turned everything a particular shade of institutional yellow. The contracting office was on the 2nd floor. The door at the top of the stairs was open, not ajar, open. Fully, with the specific quality of a door left open by someone who had left in a hurry or wasn't planning to come back. Marrow's lead security officer went through first. Standard clearance. The office was empty in the way that said recently rather than always. A chair pushed back, a screen left on standby, a coffee cup still with warmth on the outside when Ava touched it as she passed. "He ran," one of the security officers said. "He had warning," Marrow said. She was looking at the standby screen. "Someone told him we were coming." Ava stood in the middle of the office and thought about the geometry of the last 20 minutes. Doss waking up, talking to Harmon, the medic being sent to find her. How many people had been in that corridor? How many people had heard the medic say what he'd said before he'd reached her door? The installation at 0200 was not empty. It had a night staff, a security rotation, people moving between buildings on authorized business. Any one of them could have been in a position to hear or to carry information. Or it was simpler than that. She looked at the standby screen. It had a communication log visible on its surface. The last active window before standby, never properly closed. She leaned in. The last outbound message was time-stamped 11 minutes ago. The recipient address was a routing code she didn't recognize. The body of the message was 4 words. Package delivered. Package survived. "Marrow," she said. Marrow came and looked. "Package delivered is St. Eldridge," Ava said. "The attack. Package survived is Doss." She straightened. "This was sent before Doss woke up and talked, before any of us knew he had information about Fossey." Marrow looked at her. "Fossey didn't run because of Doss," Ava said. "He ran because whoever he sent this message to told him to. This was a pre-planned exit. He was never planning to stay past tonight." She looked at the timestamp again. "He's been waiting for confirmation that the St. Eldridge operation either succeeded or failed. When he got it, he moved." "Then he's not in the building," Marrow said. "He was never planning to be." Marrow pulled her radio. The next 4 minutes were procedural. Base perimeter lockdown, vehicle manifest check, the specific activated machinery of a military installation that had been told to find a specific person and close every exit simultaneously. Ava stood in the contracting office and let it happen around her and thought about her father. She thought about him because the shape of Fossey's exit, the pre-planned route, the message sent at the precise moment of confirmation, the clean departure from a position he'd held for 6 weeks, was the shape of someone who had done this before, who had built departure into the plan from the beginning, who understood that in operations like this, the exit was designed before the entry. Her father had taught her that. He'd called it reverse engineering the operation. Start with where you need to end up and work backward to where you need to start. The people who got caught were the ones who planned forward and ran out of road. The ones who didn't get caught had already mapped the road home before they took the first step. Fossey had mapped his road home. The question was whether he'd mapped it well enough. They found him at the vehicle depot. Not because of the perimeter lockdown, which had been executed correctly and completely. Dunmore's security team ran it in 4 minutes flat, which was good. They found him because Ava walked to the window of the contracting office while Marrow managed the radio traffic, looked out at the installation's layout, and thought about where she would go if she were Fossey. Not the main gate, not the secondary access. That road was buried under the same storm that had locked St. Eldridge. Not the airfield, which had security and cameras and required coordination she didn't have time to arrange. The vehicle depot had a maintenance exit on its north side that connected to a service track used for heavy equipment movement. The service track ran along the installation's perimeter and terminated at a maintenance shed half a mile out, where equipment was staged for winter operations. The maintenance shed had its own vehicle pool, snow equipment, tracked vehicles, things that operated in conditions that would stop conventional transport. She told Marrow. Marrow sent 2 people to the main depot entrance and 2 to the north maintenance exit. Garrett Fossey was in the maintenance shed in a tracked utility vehicle that he'd had running for 6 minutes when Marrow's security team came through both doors simultaneously. He didn't fight it. That was the thing that she noted later. He had the specific stillness of someone who had run the calculation and found it closed. He sat in the driver's seat of the utility vehicle with his hands visible and looked at the people coming through the doors and made no move that would give anyone a reason to escalate. It was the behavior of someone who understood consequences professionally and had decided that the consequences of resistance were worse than the consequences of custody. He looked older than his file photograph. 47, according to Merrow's briefing, but he looked past 50. Something about the eyes, the particular flatness of them, which wasn't cold exactly, but was the absence of something that eyes usually had. He looked at Ava when they brought him out. "Carter?" he said. She hadn't told him her name, which meant her name was somewhere in his operational file, which meant her father's name was somewhere in his operational file, which meant everything Merrow had said about the connection between Ardmore Group and the investigation into her father's death had just moved from intelligence assessment to confirmed fact. She didn't say anything back. She didn't need to. The 0700 briefing lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. Ava sat at a table with Merrow, 3 JAG officers, a representative from Naval Criminal Investigative Service, and Reyes, who had no official standing in a debrief of this classification level, and was there because Merrow had included him on the list without explaining why, which Ava understood was its own kind of statement. The briefing covered Driscoll's network, Fosse's role, the Ardmore Group's operational structure as known, and the formal reopening of the investigation into Commander James Carter's death. The last item took 12 minutes. 12 minutes to explain 3 years of questions. The JAG officer presenting it was careful and precise, and he said the words, "evidence of deliberate interference with safety protocols," in a way that had the quality of legal language trying to contain something that was larger than legal language. Ava sat with her hands flat on the table and heard every word and didn't look away from the presenter. When it was over, Merrow asked if she had questions. "One," Ava said. "What's the timeline?" Federal prosecution of Driscoll and his team, concurrent with the Ardmore investigation, is being managed by a joint task force. Fosse's cooperation, if obtained, accelerates it significantly. A pause. "We believe Fosse will cooperate. His exit plan failed, and he's intelligent enough to understand what that means for his options." "And Voss?" "Theodore Voss was detained this morning at 4:47 at his residence in Tacoma." Merrow said it without particular inflection, which was its own kind of satisfaction. "He was cooperative. He had less choice than Fosse." Ava nodded. She looked at her hands on the table. "I want regular updates," she said, "on the investigation. Not summaries, actual updates from the case team. That's my condition for signing the commendation paperwork." Merrow looked at her for a moment. "That's not typically how commendations work." "I'm aware." A pause, then, "I'll make the arrangements." Harmon came to find her at 10:30, which was when she was sitting in the medical wing's small family waiting area with a cup of actual coffee. Someone had located a real coffee maker in the officer's lounge, and the gesture had made it down to the regular staff, and her arm in its sling and the patch from her father's file in her left hand. She'd taken it out of the sleeve. She was holding it the way you held something you weren't sure yet what to do with, carefully, not gripping. Harmon sat down across from her. He looked like he'd slept in the clothes he'd been wearing, which he had, and he looked older than he had at St. Eldridge, and also somehow less defended, the way people sometimes looked when the structures they'd been hiding behind turned out not to hold. He sat there for a moment without saying anything. "You don't have to do this," she said. "I know." He looked at the coffee cup in his hands. "I treated you like a problem to be managed, from the moment you arrived." "Yes." "I've been doing this for 26 years and I've never—" He stopped. Started again differently. "I looked at you and I saw what I expected to see, not what was actually there." "That's a common problem," she said. "Not generously, honestly. It's an inexcusable one in a physician." He looked at her directly. The self-assessment in it was genuine and uncomfortable, which was the only kind worth anything. "You saved every person in that building, including me." "The whole team saved everyone in that building." "You know what I mean." She did. "Apology received, Dr. Harmon. For real this time." He nodded. He looked at the patch in her hand. He didn't ask about it, which she appreciated. "What happens to you now?" he said. She looked at the patch. The embroidery was small and precise. The design her father had described to her once in the particular sideways way he described things he cared about. Not directly, not with sentiment, just with enough detail that she'd known it mattered. A compass rose with one point extended, the extended point shaped like a rotor blade. "I go back to work," she said. "At St. Eldridge?" "At St. Eldridge." She turned the patch over in her hand. "There are patients there who need follow-up. The facility needs a staff assessment, and someone needs to write up the maintenance report on the generator exhaust system before the next storm season." He almost smiled. "That's very practical." "I'm a practical person." He stood, extended his hand. She shook it carefully with her left. He left. She sat for a while after that. The waiting room was quiet at this hour. The installation had moved through its crisis response and into its recovery phase, which had its own particular sound, lower and more organized than the acute phase, people moving with purpose rather than urgency. Through the window, she could see the landing pad where the Jayhawk was still sitting, inspected now by a maintenance crew who had confirmed her assessment of the transmission and two other issues she'd noted and filed and not had time to report until the debrief. She looked at the patch. Her father had given it to Marrow before his last deployment. He'd known, going in, that there was a possibility he wouldn't come back. He'd planned for it. He'd arranged for the thing he wanted her to have to be in hands that would know when to pass it along. He'd been right about that, the way he'd been right about most operational things. The execution had been painful. 3 years of not knowing, 3 years of a file that said accident and a feeling in her chest that said otherwise. But the plan itself had been correct. The patch had gotten to her. The investigation had been opened. The people responsible were in custody. She understood, sitting there in the waiting room with bad coffee and a separated shoulder and her father's patch in her palm, that this was how he'd operated his whole life. Not with grand gestures, not with declarations, with patience and positioning and the quiet confidence that if you built something solid enough and placed it correctly, it would hold. He had built her to be solid. He had placed her at St. Eldridge when she needed to be there. It had held. Reyes found her at the pad an hour later. She was standing next to the Jayhawk, not for any operational reason. The maintenance crew had finished and moved on. The aircraft was grounded pending the transmission inspection. There was nothing for her to do there. She was standing there because she needed to see it in daylight, in the aftermath. The aircraft that had been a desperate calculation 12 hours ago was now just a helicopter in Alaska in the snow, a little battered, unremarkable. She looked at the dent on the right skid from the hard landing, a small thing, evidence. Reyes came and stood next to her without preamble. "Fosse is cooperating," he said. "Marrow's team got confirmation 20 minutes ago. He's giving names, dates, the full operational history of Ardmore Group's activity in the Bering Zone." He paused. "Including what happened to your father." She absorbed that. The cold was significant out here, but she'd stopped registering it the way you stopped registering things that were constant. What does cooperating mean for his outcome? Better than Driscoll. Worse than good. That's appropriate. Yeah. He looked at the Jayhawk. Maintenance chief says the transmission is salvageable. 2 weeks of work. He paused. He also said that flying it the way you flew it with a torque reading at the line for 23 minutes was either very skilled or very lucky. Both, she said. You need both. He was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about what you said, about people seeing what they expect to see. I said that to Harmon. I was listening in the hallway. He said it without apology. I did it too. When you walked into that trauma bay, I looked at you and made a decision before you'd done anything. You came around, after you'd already saved 3 people. Reyes, she looked at him. You're not the first person who's made that mistake about me, and you won't be the last. The question isn't whether people misjudge you. The question is what you do while they're doing it. He looked at her steadily. What did you do? I kept working. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and held something out. A patch. Different from her father's. A different unit. The particular design of the SEAL teams she'd spent her whole life around without ever being formally part of. It was old, worn at the edges. This was mine, he said. First team, first deployment. He paused. I've been carrying it for 20 years. She looked at it. Your father was on that deployment, he said. He's the reason we came home. He held it out steadily. I've been looking for the right moment to give something back. I think this is it. She took it. She held it alongside her father's patch, the two of them in her left hand, the old and the worn, proof of two different debts and one through line that connected them. She didn't trust her voice for a moment. She took the moment quietly and didn't apologize for it. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once. The particular economy of the man, he'd said everything he had to say and he was done, and that was exactly right. They stood there at the edge of the landing pad while the Alaska wind did what Alaska wind does in the aftermath of a blizzard. It dropped. Not to nothing, but to something manageable, something that merely moved the world rather than threatening to end it. In the east, through the overcast, there was a lightning that might or might not become actual light before the clouds reasserted themselves. But it was there, present, worth noting. She went back to St. Eldridge 2 weeks later. The road had been cleared, the generator exhaust system had been repaired by a maintenance team Merrow had quietly arranged, and the hospital was running on full power with 2 additional security protocols that would not, Ava thought, be sufficient on their own, but were meaningfully better than what had existed before. She filed an assessment on the remaining gaps within 48 hours of her return. She included the maintenance log issue she'd raised with Harmon on the morning of the storm. She included it by name, with dates, because accuracy mattered, and because leaving it out would have been a form of kindness she didn't owe anyone. Harmon read the assessment and co-signed it. He sent it up the chain without editing her language. She started her morning shift at 0600 on her 3rd day back, which was a shift that included 4 post-operative checks, a frostbite assessment on a corporal who had made poor decisions about gloves during a training exercise, and 2 hours of paperwork that had accumulated during her absence. It was ordinary. It was the ordinary that required the extraordinary to protect, and she understood that more clearly now than she had before. Webb came to find her at 1400. He was on limited duty. His shoulder had healed faster than projected, which he told her with the specific pride of someone who had expected no less from himself. And he appeared in the ward doorway with 2 cups of the same bad coffee she'd been drinking since she arrived. He held one out. She took it. "How's home?" she said. "Out of the 2nd surgery, grumpy." He leaned against the doorframe. "He asked about you. Tell him to stop walking on it before the surgeon clears him." "I'll tell him you said that. He'll ignore it." "I know." She drank the coffee. It was bad. It was exactly what it had always been. Webb looked at her for a moment with the green eyes that had been scared on a gurney 2 weeks ago and were something different now. "Can I ask you something?" "You're going to anyway." "Why did you come here?" "To St. Eldridge, before all of this. The assignment, the paperwork reason. Why this posting?" She considered the question honestly. It was a question she'd asked herself. In the quiet way she asked herself hard things, and she had an answer that was true even if it was incomplete. "Because the work here is real," she said. "Because the people who come through that trauma bay need someone who knows what they're carrying and can handle it. And because," she stopped for a moment, "because I know what it is to be underestimated in a room, and I know what it costs the room when the wrong person gets dismissed." He was quiet. "I didn't come here to prove anything," she said. "I came here to do the job." The proving was incidental. He nodded slowly, the kind of nod that meant he was going to think about that for a while. She finished the coffee. She set the cup down. She picked up the next chart. Outside, the Alaska sky was doing something it did rarely enough to notice. It was clearing. The overcast that had lived over the range for 2 weeks was breaking apart in sections, and through the gaps there was actual blue. Not much of it, not reliably, but real. A color that belonged to a sky that was not trying to kill anyone. She looked at it for a moment through the ward window. Then she went back to work. There is a particular kind of person that institutions consistently underestimate, not because they are weak, but because they have learned to be quiet. To carry what they carry without announcing it. To do the work that needs doing without waiting for permission or recognition or even acknowledgement. These people are everywhere. They are in every room, every crisis, every moment when everything falls apart and someone has to hold it together. They don't look the part. They don't broadcast the part. They simply are the part, and the world around them keeps making the same mistake, over and over, of confusing silence with absence. Ava Carter knew who she was before anyone in that hospital did. She had always known. The blizzard didn't make her. The mission didn't create her. They only revealed what was already there, what had been built and carried and held in reserve for the moment when it was needed. She saved 11 people that night. She did it without being asked, without being authorized, without being believed until it was too late to doubt her. The woman they thought needed saving was the one who brought everyone home. She had never needed them to see it. She just needed them to be alive when the storm was over.